Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Limpet drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Detonation sequence initiated. Detonation in 10 seconds. Cargo scoop deployed. Programming limpet drone. Programming limpet drone. Programming limpet drone. Collector limpet expired. Cargo scoop retracted. Programming limpet drone. Prospect limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospect limpet failed. Prospect limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet failed. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Detonation sequence initiated. Detonation in 10 seconds. Engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Programming Asteroid scan complete. Programming liquid drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming liquid drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming liquid drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming liquid drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming limpet drone. Prospector limpet failed. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming liquid drone. Prospector limpet engaged. Asteroid scan complete. Programming liquid drone. Asteroid scan complete. Engaged. Asteroid scan complete.
The Federation. Introduction. For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see, saw the vision of the world and all the wonder that would be. Saw the heavens fill with commerce, argosies of magic sails, pilots of the purple twilight dropping down with costly bales, till the war drum throbbed no longer and the battle flags were furled in the Parliament of Man. The Federation of the World. Alfred Lord Tennyson, Locksley Hall, 1835.
How then to attempt the impossible task of summing up the Federation? We are the ones who draw the lines. Our forefathers, who lived through the bitter anguish of global wars, drew a line under them and declared, no more.
Prospect limit engaged.
We enshrined the rights of all citizens in our Constitution, underlined them, and signed. We plotted the lines that first linked the star systems, bringing humanity to the shores of new worlds, opening the way to interstellar trade. And when humanity itself, in the exuberance of youth, threatened the delicate balance life, again we drew a line. Thus far let us lawfully tread, and no further.
Programming Limpet drone.
Isaac Gellin, Federation President. Inaugural Speech, 2862. The Federation is the oldest of the galaxy's three superpowers, a vast geopolitical entity reaching out from the core system of Sol and encompassing a broad socio-economic spectrum. Among the myriad federal star systems, one can find extraordinary wealth, crushing poverty, and everything in between. By contrast with the Empire, which offers a social safety net in the form of state-sanctioned slavery, the poorest members of federal society have no safeguards and no way out. For them, life on the graffiti-stained streets is inescapable, and the gulf between their lives and those of the super-rich could not be more insurmountable. At its best, the Federation embodies the values of its founding nations: democracy, industry, and liberty. But federal society can also be competitive and unforgiving. Corporations wield too much power, politicians are often corrupt, and a sink-or-swim ethos prevails. The Alliance. Introduction. Rise, like lions after slumber, in unvanquishable number. Shake your chains to earth, like dew which in sleep had fallen on you. Ye are many, they are few. Percy Bysshe Shelley, The Mask of Anarchy, 1819.
I've read your speech a dozen times, Mick. We can't use it. Sure, we could sound off about self-rule and freedom from tyranny and the dignity of the working man/woman, and the young hotheads would lap it up like they always do. I'm not saying we don't need that stuff. But we mustn't forget it's just marketing. A shiny wrapper. It's not
Asteroid
enough.
scan complete.
If we're going to make the alliance of independent systems happen, we need more than tub-thumping speeches from a war hero. We need to show our people that the damn thing can work. I want spending plans, dividend forecasts, surveyors' reports. I want data so dry you don't need to believe in it. The people are tired and heartsick. They've been sold dreams too many times by both sides, so let's not try to sell them anymore. It's time to wake up.
Limpet engaged.
Private communique from Meredith Argent to Mick Turner, founders of the Alliance. The Alliance is the youngest of the galaxy's three superpowers, and is perhaps best understood in terms of what it chooses not to be. It rejects both the extreme capitalism of the Federation and the rigid hierarchy of the Empire, choosing instead a third way of voluntary association for mutual benefit. The desire for freedom from interference, both from external threats and internal bureaucracy, was the key motivation behind the Alliance's founding and is enshrined in its Articles of Association. The governments of the member systems are given as much autonomy to create their own laws and administer their own affairs as possible. The right to political self-determination and cultural self-expression are essential to the Alliance, but it remains to be seen whether the ultimate result will be stable harmony or a cacophony of dissenting voices. Every Alliance member knows that alliances have been made before, many times over, only to collapse. The Thargoids. Human Thargoid contact. The Thargoids are a non-human race with a history of hostility towards humanity. The first recorded encounter with a Thargoid ship took place in 2849, although earlier undocumented encounters are believed to have taken place. In the years that followed, contact with lone Thargoid vessels was intermittently reported. Humanity clashed with the Thargoids in the 32nd century, but details of the conflict remained scarce for many years, and it proved difficult to differentiate authentic accounts of Thargoid encounters from the sensationalist media stories of the time. The discovery of abandoned intergalactic naval reserve arm bases in 3303 did much to dispel the fog,
Asteroid
however.
scan complete.
The INRA, a joint federal imperial initiative established in 3193, was responsible for researching the Thargoids and developing technologies to counter their aggression. But the organization's lack of accountability meant that the details of its research did not come to light until years after its dissolution. Almost all of the reliable data concerning the Thargoids has been sourced from INRA facilities. This data, originally deemed highly confidential, was declassified in 3304, following a resolution from the federal government and an imperial decree. Some controversy over the backing and funding of the INRA remains, however.
Asteroid scan complete.
The Guardians. Introduction. The Guardians were a non-human race that occupied a large area of space several million years ago. At its height, the Guardian civilization was technologically superior to human civilization of the 33rd century and occupied an area of roughly equivalent size. The Guardians endured as a spacefaring civilization for at least 8,000 years before being destabilized by a lengthy civil war. The surviving Guardians were then destroyed by artificially intelligent machines of their own creation. The galaxy contains the ruins of dozens of Guardian settlements, and data logs recovered from these sites have allowed humanity to compile a remarkably detailed picture of Guardian society. Individuals. Aidan Tanner.
Our species has been banding together to fight the outsider since we lived in caves. We stand against the lawless, the invaders, and the monsters. And we're proud to do it. But you have to remember one thing. Nobody in the history of conflict ever saw himself as a monster. Everyone believes they're the hero of their own story. If you can't understand that, if you can't stand in the enemy's shoes, even for a second, and ask yourself why he thinks he needs to kill you, then you don't know what it means to be a soldier.
Aidan Tanner, addressed to Federal Cadets, 3298. Admiral Aidan Tanner is a senior officer in the Federal Navy. He has served for more than 4 decades, and in 3303 was given significant responsibility in the struggle against the Thargoids, first being appointed to Chief of Federal Security and later to Chief Military Liaison for the Cross-Superpower Initiative, Aegis. He is widely respected, even outside of federal space, for his conscientious and level-headed approach to conflict. Born in 3254, Tanner was expected to follow in the footsteps of his authoritarian father by becoming a doctor, but instead enlisted in the Federal Navy, along with a group of friends, in what he would later describe as a rash act of adolescent rebellion that I have not once regretted. Tanner's father died in 3277. The two never resolved their estrangement. Tanner's early naval career was anything but distinguished. Known to his comrades in arms as Spoonie for his habit of eating directly from food packets instead of using plates, he was distinguished more by his irreverent sense of humor than his competence. 6 months in, Tanner was found to be responsible for a scurrilous newsletter that satirized several senior officers, including Sergeant Burke Hazel, who was offended and deeply hurt. Hazel had taken a personal interest in Tanner and had encouraged him to persist when the cadet had struggled with basic training. Tanner's defense that he had been trying to improve morale was rejected, and although he was allowed to continue his service, he was marked as a potential insubordinate, a label that would later return to haunt him. Tanner's chief instructional officer, Commander Myra Dunstock, warned him to take military life more seriously. She took Tanner to a refugee facility, an experience he would later characterize as showing him what the military is there to prevent. Tanner recognized a last chance when he saw it, discarded his role as camp comedian, and threw himself into his training with unprecedented energy. The decisive incident in Tanner's career was the Autolycus mutiny of 3271. At the time, Tanner was serving as Chief Gunnery Officer on board the FDN Autolycus, a Farragut-class battlecruiser, under the command of Captain Jaden Horn. The ship was dispatched to restore order at Cold Harbor Station, which had been occupied by rebels following a descent into civil disorder. Captain Horn's orders were to monitor the station and await reinforcements. But when contact with the station was abruptly lost, he became convinced an attack was imminent. Surveillance footage later showed Horn acting in an increasingly erratic fashion. He screamed orders, slurred his words, and struck an ensign for making a minor mistake. Seeing a group of civilian ships preparing to leave the station, Horn ordered Tanner to open fire, convinced they were about to ram the Autolycus. Tanner refused to obey the order, claiming it was unlawful and that Horn was unfit to command. In the time it took for a furious Horn to have Tanner thrown in the brig, the escaping ships had jumped out of the system. At Tanner's court-martial, Horn tried to use his history of rebelliousness against him, but an explosive series of revelations followed. The escaping ships had been carrying evacuees, and the station's apparent silence was in fact due to Horn himself, who had disabled shipborne communications without telling his crew. Horn, who it would later emerge had been suffering from nexalamine-induced psychosis, committed suicide mid-trial by hijacking a fighter and detonating a grenade inside the cockpit. Tanner was exonerated, receiving a commendation from President Antonia Madison for his actions. Individuals. Aisling Duval.
My grandfather had an heirloom he used to keep in our winter palace. It was a priceless marble statuette of one of our ancestors standing with his foot on a woman's neck, while she looks up at him in fear or adoration, probably both. I loathed it. It was commissioned to commemorate some victory or other, but that wasn't the point of the thing. The message was clear, and it's the same one I've heard all my life. Deep down, the people we dominate are happy to be dominated. When I was 6 years old, I smashed it. The servants came running. My father stormed down the stairs in his gown. He asked if it was an accident. There was such a strange look in his eyes. I knew that if I said yes, nobody would argue. Nothing more would be said. But I didn't. I stamped my foot and said, "No, Daddy. I did it on purpose." It's the same with tradition. The people who pass it on think it's precious. They expect you to cherish it and pass it on in turn. But what they think doesn't matter, because the responsibility rests with you. If you know it's wrong, then you have to smash it. On purpose.
Prospect limpet engaged.
Aisling Duval. A fireside chat with Serena.
Asteroid
3301.
scan complete.
Princess Aisling Duval, born in 3276, is a prominent member of the imperial royal family. The eldest child of the infamous Prince Harold, she had a troubled upbringing. Her father was notorious for his hedonistic lifestyle, while her mother, entertainer Imogen Eccentrica Gabriellini, died from an aneurysm shortly after Aisling's birth. The autopsy identified the cause of death as an overdose of purple sunflake, an obscure and expensive narcotic. The conspiracy theorists insisted that she was murdered to remove an embarrassment to the royal family. Aisling has indicated that she is aware of these rumors, but has never commented on them. Despite living a life of great privilege, Aisling has publicly embraced the cause of the less fortunate and become an outspoken opponent of slavery, something that has made her the target of fierce criticism from more traditionalist imperials. But despite this criticism, Aisling is a popular figure with a widespread media presence. Her campaigning has brought definite benefits to many of the poorest in imperial society, and gone some way towards easing tensions between the Empire and the Federation. Her critics, however, dismiss her as a puppet, doing the bidding of a shadowy circle of advisors. They claim there is no underlying coherence to Aisling's policies. To them, she is a naive and sentimental child, without the necessary experience for politics, backing one populist cause after another. always conscious of how her activism is affecting her brand. Significantly, the most savage of Aisling's critics and the staunchest of her defenders agree on a counterpoint to this, that her apparent vacuity is nothing but a front, carefully created in collusion with the very advisors whom others believe are exploiting her. The People's Princess, they argue, is exceptionally good at being underestimated. Following the death of Hengist Deval in 3301, Aisling was considered by many to be a viable contender for the imperial throne. As Aisling was born out of wedlock, however, and her father was removed from the line of succession on the grounds of mental incapacity, Orissa Lavinie Deval was deemed to have the stronger claim. The Federation. Introduction. For I dipped into the future, far as human eye could see. All the vision of the world and all the wonder. The Guardians. Early history. The Thargoids. Society. The INRA discovered that Thargoid society is organized into hives, with most Thargoids falling into three categories: queens, princesses, and drones. Queens function as reproducers, while drones serve to maintain a favorable environment for the rest of the hive. Thargoid hives can be vast, though it may be that some of the larger observed groups are in fact multiple, overlapping hives. Ultimately, little is known for sure. The average Thargoid queen is at least as intelligent as a human being, while the typical drone possesses a more rudimentary level of intelligence. Existing evidence suggests that queens have extremely long lifespans, living for hundreds or even thousands of years. The variable size of queens' neurocraniums suggests this might be an indicator of age. Little is known about the precise nature of Thargoid reproduction, but it is likely that queens can reproduce both sexually, with other queens, and asexually. It is thought that the latter method produces drones, while the former produces a new queen. Analysis of Thargoid specimens led some INRA researchers to believe that a new queen, princess, becomes a full queen only once it has produced drones of its own. Significantly, queens are believed to be single-sex. The Thargoids' ability to reproduce asexually means that their populations can expand incredibly quickly, but it is thought that they deliberately restrict the size of the populace so as to not to deplete all available resources. There is evidence to suggest that this is sometimes achieved by culling older drones. INRA testing indicated that queens perceive drones as entirely expendable, presumably due to the ease with which they can be replaced. Indeed, a Thargoid queen appears to give no more thought to the loss of a drone than a human would an eyelash.
Prospector limpet engaged.
The Thargoids. Communication. The belief that Thargoids were capable of some form of extrasensory communication was often cited in the early years of human-Thargoid interaction, but prior to the discovery of INRA records, it was not fully understood. Professor Yuri Anslow of the INRA theorized that a Thargoid queen can communicate with the drones in its hive via a spread-spectrum electronic signal, and can use this signal to control the drones, and even to share their sensory input. Studies of battlefield footage certainly suggest some kind of near-instantaneous communication among Thargoids, and the presence of low-level radio noise in areas occupied by Thargoids indicates that they do indeed communicate via short-range electronic signals. Professor Anslow went on to claim that a queen could effectively see and hear through its drones, but her contemporaries were skeptical, dismissing the assertion as baseless. Professor Ishmael Palin, one of the galaxy's foremost experts on the Thargoids, has even gone so far as to denounce Anslow as a glory hound. Thargoids have been known to make staccato clicking noises with their mouthparts when in the presence of humans, punctuated with occasional hisses and buzzes. They've also been observed directing such noises at one another, albeit much less frequently. Professor Albert Tesreau, a founding member of the Joint Superpower Initiative, AEGIS, and a specialist in interspecies communication, has studied INRA audio logs and suggested that the sounds probably represent some kind of language due to the repetition of certain sound combinations.
Engaged.
It is unclear why the Thargoids would sometimes choose to communicate with each other
Asteroid
vocally,
scan
given their
complete.
capacity for extrasensory communication. Professor Anslow suggested that the sounds could be designed to intimidate enemies or opponents, noting that Thargoids often produce them prior to combat. Thargoid ships have been observed emitting a complex array of sounds, and in some cases subtly changing color. The exact meaning of these behaviors has not been determined, but they appear to correspond to different emotional states. What is not known is if these sounds are produced by the pilot and amplified by the ship, or emitted by the ship itself. If the sounds originate with the pilot, it would suggest some kind of physiological connection between pilot and vessel. Given the sophistication of Thargoid bioengineering, however, it is possible that the sounds come from the ship itself, and that Thargoid ships are able to feel and communicate to a limited degree. The hulls of Thargoid ships are typically emblazoned with one of several symbols, the meaning of which is unknown. Some have theorized that they could denote membership of a particular familial group, or possibly be an indicator of rank. The Thargoids. Physiology. Human understanding of Thargoid physiology is far from complete, but recovered INRA data has offered some insights into their nature. INRA records describe the average Thargoid as physically larger than a human being, and generally insectoid in appearance. Thargoid biology is carbon-based, using an RNA-like encoding for biological information, but Thargoid chemistry is based on ammonia rather than water. Consequently, while Thargoids can comfortably tolerate environments as cold as -80 degrees Celsius, they cannot withstand environments warmer than 45 degrees Celsius for long. According to notes compiled by Dr. Peregrine Hennig, an INRA researcher, Thargoids can survive for a significant time in the vacuum of space without apparent discomfort, and can tolerate radiation and extreme cold for far longer than a human. The Thargoids. Vulnerabilities. In 3250, the INRA developed a biological weapon known as the mycoid virus for use against the Thargoids. The virus was the result of an accidental discovery made by an INRA researcher who noted that a particular strain of fungus was found to thrive on the hulls of Thargoid vessels and appeared to be digesting the material of which the ship was made. The INRA refined the fungal strain and began experimenting on living Thargoids in their spacecraft. The mycoid proved to have deleterious effects on both, leading to the swift elimination of the Thargoids active in human-occupied space at the time. It is widely assumed that since the last human-Thargoid conflict, the Thargoids have developed an immunity to the mycoid virus. The Thargoids. Starships. In terms of structure and function, Thargoid vessels are radically different from anything produced by humanity and are able to navigate hyperspace in ways that are not fully understood. They are also at least partly organic, meaning that they can self-repair or heal over time. Ship function in general, and this restorative ability in particular, have been shown to be dependent upon the require special containers for safe transport. Thargoid vessels that have sustained combat damage exhibit scar-like patterns. Given that Thargoid technology is sophisticated enough for such damage to be repaired, it follows that the Thargoids might deliberately choose to preserve these scars. Owner logs document an encounter with a Thargoid mothership many times larger than other Thargoid craft, against which the microenvirus was successfully deployed, although no such vessels have been reported in recent times. The Thargoids. Structures. Dozens of planets in human-occupied space are peppered with Thargoid barnacles, biological resource extractors that convert minerals into meta-alloys, a key component in the creation of Thargoid vehicles and technology. Theories that these barnacles have been genetically engineered by the Thargoids have yet to be verified. Larger structures, referred to as Thargoid surface sites, have also been discovered. These sites typically consist of a spiral-shaped structure, nestling within a shallow crater, beneath which lies a series of tunnels. At the heart of this subsurface network is a device that, once activated, emits a holographic star map. The sites are patrolled by semi-sentient biomechanical entities called scavengers. The Thargoids. War with the Guardians.
Collector limpet
Archaeological
expired.
records have revealed that the extinct, non-human civilization known as the Guardians experienced conflict with the Thargoids many thousands of years ago. Logs recovered from Guardian sites indicate that the Thargoids were the aggressor in this conflict. Having seeded Guardian space with biomechanical constructs used for resource extraction long before the emergence of the Guardian civilization, the Thargoids apparently believed they were entitled to uncontested dominion of the territory. The Guardians attempted to communicate with the Thargoids and reach a compromise, but without success. Over the course of the conflict, the Guardians developed new technologies to give them an advantage against the Thargoids. These technologies were apparently successful, forcing the Thargoids to abandon their offensive. The Thargoids. Agenda. Thargoids do not attack indiscriminately, and their choice of targets shows them to be highly intelligent. They have also conducted targeted strikes on Aegis facilities and attacked pilots carrying Thargoid items in their cargo holds, indicating that they know they are being studied and want to halt the process. But despite their evident intelligence, they appear to be completely uninterested in meaningful communication. The engineer Ramtar, who has extensively researched the Guardians and their war with the Thargoids, holds the view that Thargoid aggression is a product of territorialism. They seed an area with barnacles, thus laying claim to it, and return, sometimes many centuries later, to harvest the extracted resources. Any life form advanced enough to compete with them for the territory is treated as an enemy and summarily attacked. Professor Palin concurs with this view, adding that the Thargoids are apparently so determined to eliminate any threats to their long-term survival, they will not tolerate any advanced species in close proximity. The Guardians. Early history. The Guardian Society originally consisted of groups of pack hunters who banded together for mutual protection before organizing themselves into clans. Even at this stage, the Guardians were highly intelligent, and they developed sophisticated hunting strategies that quickly saw them become their planet's apex predator. The Guardians' nascent civilization consisted of two discrete ethnic groups, one based primarily in the south of the planet and one in the north. As these groups expanded, they began to encroach on each other's territory, leading to a conflict that quickly blossomed into civil war. The northern clan, despite being the smaller of the two groups, overcame their enemy swiftly and with minimal bloodshed, bringing the entirety of the Guardian civilization under their leadership. In the centuries that followed, the Guardian Society developed rapidly. Despite their warlike instincts, the Guardians possessed a remarkable capacity for collaboration and compromise. Their willingness to defer immediate gains in favor of lasting societal benefits allowed them to establish a stable, mutually cooperative society that was to remain peaceful and prosperous for thousands of years. The Guardians. Technological era. Although the Guardian Society was in many ways a model of social equilibrium, the Guardians were nevertheless at the mercy of an insidious issue: overpopulation. As their civilization grew and the amount of available land and resources dwindled, the Guardians set their sights on interplanetary colonization. By this time, the Guardians had developed a rudimentary form of space travel. But as the pressures of overpopulation became more acute, the rate of technological progress accelerated, and the Guardians' imperfect starships were soon supplanted by fast, powerful spacefaring vessels. In the centuries that followed, the Guardian civilization expanded rapidly, eventually coming to occupy a region equal to that inhabited by present-day humanity. The Guardian's next major development was the creation of an interstellar communications system known as the Monolith Network.
Asteroid scan
In addition to
complete.
functioning as a comprehensive cultural archive, the network allowed those connected to it to freely and instantaneously share knowledge and ideas. But connection to the network was dependent on the use of neural implants, and some of the Guardians were uneasy about this fusion of biological and non-biological. The Guardians. War with the Thargoids. Tens of thousands of years earlier, when the Guardians were still a non-spacefaring race, a group of Thargoids accelerated the rate of progress. Soon, the Guardians' experiments bore fruit, resulting in the first fully sentient machines. These constructs were seen as a means to further enhance the Guardians' technological mastery and were integrated into various aspects of their society. New neural implants were developed that connected the Guardians with both the constructs and the Monolith Network in a symbiotic circle. But not everyone was happy with this development. The Guardians had always venerated nature, and many saw this new paradigm as a perversion of the natural order. A schism emerged between the nature-worshipping traditionalists and the technologically minded progressives, a schism that widened with alarming speed. Efforts were made to diffuse the rising tension, but the traditionalists felt irrevocably alienated by the rapid rate of change. The constructs and the Monolith Network became scapegoats for all manner of social ills, and the traditionalists began to clamor for a return to simpler times. Ultimately, the ideological divergence proved insurmountable, and a second civil war erupted, quickly engulfing most of the Guardian star systems. In its early stages, the war was fought primarily by soldiers, but within a decade, and after significant loss of life, most of the fighting was conducted remotely. The progressives fought their enemies with automated war machines, while the traditionalists relied mostly on biological weapons. The internecine conflict raged for over 100 years, bringing the Guardian civilization to its knees and retarding further social development. The increasingly traditionalists devoted most of their resources to honoring the dead, exacerbating the problem. As the Guardian society declined, most withdrew into fortified settlements. Meanwhile, the artificially intelligent constructs were horrified by the destruction unfolding around them. Extrapolating from the current situation, they determined that even if peace was restored, the Guardians would never be able to transcend their violent natures. They decided that the only way to preclude further violence, while giving the construct's burgeoning society the best possible chance of survival, was to destroy what remained of the Guardian civilization. By this time, the constructs had been given complete control of the Guardians' munitions and automated war machines. Their attack, when it came, was swift and merciless.
4, 3, 2, 1, engage.
The strikes were executed with a precision that only a machine race could accomplish. The Guardians were utterly destroyed. The Guardians. Physiology. The Guardians were a bipedal race, and the typical Guardian was taller and more slender than the average human. They had small round eyes, a vestigial nose, and 4 digits on each hand. Their vision was superior to that of humans, while their sense of smell was poor. Their senses of hearing and touch were roughly equivalent to our own. The Guardians had pinkish red skin, but there was some variation among ethnic groups, with tones ranging from pale pink to deep crimson.
4, 3, 2, 1,
They also had serrated bony ridges on the outside of their forearms, which were used as weapons during their early history, when they were still semi-primitive pack hunters. The Guardians' environmental needs were broadly similar to those of humans. Their homeworld was warmer and had lower gravity than most Earth-like worlds. And when they began to colonize other planets, they typically favored ones that shared these qualities. The Guardians had 2 genders and reproduced sexually. Procreation was a matter of personal choice, but each individual was obligated to be a parent at least once in their life to ensure the continuation of their genetic line. The average gestation period was around 300 days, and infants were effectively helpless for a period after birth, much like human young.
ready to engage. Under attack. Frameshift drive charging. Frameshift drive charging. Three, two, one, engage. Fuel scoping.
Infants were raised in communal crashes rather than by their parents, in keeping with the collaborative philosophies that underpinned Guardian society. The Guardians. Society. The Guardians' social constructs were the key not only to their rapid development, but also to the stability
4, 3, 2, 1.
defined the halcyon days of their civilization. Although the Guardians had a natural tendency towards collaboration, it was not until the end of the First Civil War that this tendency had a measurable impact on society. The social reorganization that followed the war included the creation of statutes that defined not only individuals' rights, but also their responsibilities to each other. As the Guardian society developed, further laws were passed that required individuals to participate in socially progressive activities, from caring for the young to conducting scientific research. These responsibilities were supported by the state, which made education and information freely available to all.
4, 3, 2, 1.
For most of their history, the Guardians had no formal faith, but the creation of the monolith network precipitated the emergence of a nature religion that decried the veneration of technology. Although this religion had its roots in the Guardians' long-standing reverence for the natural world, it quickly became a radical movement, violently opposed to the use of neural implants and other advanced technologies. Ultimately, however, this new religion was to endure for only a short period, its existence cut short by the destruction of the Guardian society. The Guardians. Technology. The Guardians' pre-industrial history was in many ways similar to that of the human race, with the development of tools and agriculture proving central to their development. But one respect in which they differed was in their understanding of biological engineering. The practice of selective breeding in order to eliminate or promote certain genetic traits began before the First Civil War, and as the Guardian society progressed, their skill as genetic engineers developed in step. After the war, the Guardians developed the ability to enhance their immune systems to guard against infection, and engineered specific microorganisms to eliminate biological threats. Genetic manipulation also played a part in prenatal care, which involved the removal of hereditary diseases and other undesirable conditions prior to birth. The Guardians were an ecologically conscientious people who assiduously avoided the use of rockets and fossil fuels. Their first spacecraft lacked any form of internal propulsion and were fired into space with electromagnetic launchers. Pilots and passengers were cocooned inside bubbles of breathable gel, which protected them from G-forces of launch and doubled as hibernation pods during long journeys. When it came to warfare, the Guardians relied initially on the blade-like protrusions on their forearms, and later on simple weapons like spears and bows. As they entered the technological era, they developed electromagnetic projectile weapons, utilizing the same technology they used to launch their first spacecraft. They also developed extremely effective shields, capable of protecting entire cities, and even of withstanding orbital bombardment. At that time, however, large-scale conflict was virtually unheard of, and it was not until the conflict with the Thargoids that further military innovations were made. The Guardian's Second Civil War was fought principally with bespoke biological weapons employed by the traditionalists and automated war machines used by the progressives. The shields that protected the Guardian cities were unable to resist these new weapons, forcing many of the Guardians to withdraw into heavily fortified settlements. But the Guardians' most significant technological achievements were unarguably the creation of the monolith network and the development of artificial intelligence. The use of neural implants to connect the Guardians with their creations could have ushered in a whole new era of scientific and technological discovery, but unfortunately, these innovations were to lead only to the Guardians' destruction. The Guardians. Language. The Guardians shared a single language, with only minor regional variations, and even after they colonized other planets, they continued to share a common tongue. The Guardians had three primary forms of communication: a spoken language, a gestural language, and a written language. Their spoken language emerged first, followed by a gestural language that allowed them to communicate silently while hunting. This sign language formed the basis of their written language. Consequently, while their written and gestural languages correlated closely, their spoken language was largely distinct. The Guardian's spoken language was used principally to communicate emotional
Incoming
concepts
message.
and played a central role in social bonding, while their written language was used mainly to communicate formal and practical ideas. Significantly, their written language was logographic, meaning the words and phrases were represented by single characters. The Guardians. Human-Guardian contact. In 3301, the federal presidential vessel, Starship One, suffered catastrophic drive failure during a tour of Frontier systems, resulting in the ship's destruction. Jasmina Halsey, at that time the